Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of Planning Committee A. I'm Councillor Johnny Crawshaw. I'm the chair of this committee. On my right, I have Gareth Arnold, who is the Development Manager. To the right of Gareth is Natalie Ramadin, who's the Development Management Officer. And to the right of Natalie is Alison Cook, who is the Head of Strategic Planning Policy. On my left, I have Rhys Williams as the Democracy Officer. And to the left of Rhys is Rahina Chowdhury, who is the Senior Lawyer. We're not expecting a fire alarm today, so if the alarms do go off, we'll escort members of the public out of the building by the nearest exits. If I can just ask everybody, if you've got a mobile phone, if you can make sure that it's turned off or on silent. And I'll just note that you'll see members around the table who have laptops. That's because some members prefer to use electronic papers and some prefer to use paper papers. In terms of today's meeting, can I just remind members, when you're speaking into the microphone, have your microphone right in front of you and speak as clearly as you can, because we have had some problems with the sound in this room. And can I also just remind members that today, this is the first meeting of 2 meetings. We're expecting quite a long lot of planning today. So when you're asking questions and answering, if you can just be as succinct as possible, that would be very much appreciated. In terms of apologies for today, we have got apologies from Councillor Clark, who is being substituted by Councillor Rose, from Councillor Eyre, who's been substituted by Councillor Fenton, and from Councillor Whitcroft. In terms of the way that the meetings run today, this is a business meeting of the council that's held in public, not a public meeting per se. So if I can just request that any members of the public don't make any attempt to contact or interact with members of the committee during the hearing. There is a specific slot for public participation. In terms of the length of today's meeting, if we do need to take an adjournment, I'll do so around about what I think is the halfway mark. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get through this meeting in one sitting if possible, given the time constraints that we've got. So we'll deal with that when we get to it. And then in terms of the way that we deal with the applications here, and for the benefit of anybody who hasn't seen one of these meetings before, very shortly I'll be inviting the officers to talk through the plans, and then we'll invite questions of clarity on the plans from members. I'll then invite officers to give us any updates on the report, and then we'll go straight into public participation. And we have a number of people registered to speak today. So each person is offered 3 minutes to address the committee, and then there may be the opportunity for questions from members after each speaker. Once we've gone through the public participation, I'll then invite members to ask any questions of officers on anything that they've either heard in the update or in the public participation or in the substantive report that's been published. And once we've gone through those questions, we move into debate to discuss the merits of the application. Finally, we consider the officer's recommendation first, and if the officer recommendation is accepted, that's then the end of the meeting. If we wish to do anything different than the officer recommendation, then once we've considered the officer recommendation, we'll look for any alternative ways of dealing with the application. But I will be keeping everybody guided through as to which section we are in as we move through. So on to the substantive agenda then. If I can first of all, agenda item 1, ask any members to declare any interests that they may have. I'm not seeing any hands, so I can move us on to agenda item 2, which is the general remit public participation for this committee. We don't have anybody registered under the general remit, and so I can move us on to agenda item 3, which is the plans list. And we just have the one application on this meeting today, which is the land lying to the south of Hull Road. So if I could go to Gareth and invite you to talk us through the plans, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is got a presentation which seems longer than it is. There's a lot of house types which we can probably whiz through relatively quickly, just to give an impression of what's proposed for the site. So this is a strategic housing site in the draft local plan. Has SE4. The extent of the application site, the strategic housing allocation covers the whole of this parcel of land. I'm just outlining with the pointer. But this, it's been submitted as 2 applications. This is the first of those applications, so it includes this field and this field. and excludes that field in the middle, which is subject to another application. The application's for 162 houses, and that includes 9 custom and self-built houses in outline only. So we don't have the details, as you'd expect. We don't have the details of those, the design of those houses at this point. 49 of the houses will be affordable, and that is a policy compliant 30% of the scheme. The site's not considered to be in the green belt for the reasons set out in the report. But I'll go through the presentation. So that's the land from the south. So the Badger Hill, the B&Q site, there's the large electricity substation, Grimston Bar Park and Ride, and then this is the east campus of the university with its land yet to be built out, which I'm hovering over there, the sport village. This land is within the land to the south of this line I'm making with the pointer is within the university, it's a landscaped area within the university campus area. Some photographs. So this is the proposed access to the site. Pointed out the access. This is a relatively newly, within the last decade or so, small neighborhood parade with a doctor's surgery health center. And the access to the site would be a continuation of the stub of the road here, off this field lane roundabout. Just some general photographs to show how the site is enclosed. So this is Hull Road, so the York inbound carriageway looking to the west. This is the field boundary at the Grimston Bar Park and Ride end of the site. But that's the inside of that boundary rather than the outside of the boundary. Field Lane, so this is a Hull Road Field Lane, Tranby Avenue roundabout, and boundary of the site there. Site layout. So you'll see the site is split into two parcels. These are viewing corridors to the Minster. The Minster views from Kimberlow Hill. There's some photographs which, squinting, you might be able to see it. Just pick out the top of the Minster there. So that's the thing with trees, they have a tendency to grow. And when the application was submitted, that may have been a clearer view of what you could see. This is the other viewing corridor. Again, it's slightly clearer that you can see the Minster in the distance, B&Q in the foreground, parts of Oswaldwick. The landscape master plan shows play areas within the larger parcel of land. This area here is where the 9 custom build dwellings will be. Quite a lot of off-site works proposed. You would have seen it in the report and the recommendation. So there's a footpath cycleway link outside the site to the Park and Ride sites. A footpath cycleway link along the south side of Hull Road to the roundabout. New bus stop proposed on the south, so inward bound side of Hull Road. There's already one on the outward bound side in front of B&Q. A new toucan crossing, so a shared cycle and pedestrian crossing on Hull Road, to Cross Hull Road. A new crossing on Field Lane. Improvements to the bus stops on Field Lane. And from the roundabouts, there's a missing length of footpath that could be joint used for cyclists and pedestrians. So the provision is for a 3 metre wide footpath, off-street footpath cycle, I think, to meet the existing provision westwards beyond that. Going to whiz through these. So there's a variety of houses proposed. Some of the houses have different variants depending on whether they're mid-terrace and end terrace. And I don't include those variants here. So I'll just go through without comments. Although I will comment, can't resist, there's a variety of 2 and 3 story houses proposed, and some 3 story flats as well. They're the affordable floor plans. It's the end of the presentation. Take questions from members.
Okay, so if members have any questions of detail and clarification on the plans, Councillor Stewart.
Well, hopefully it fits in the section. I mean, it'll probably get the first map up, I guess. It's on the sort of local plan aspect, because obviously I appreciate where we are with the local plan, and where this site is with, or where the whole thing is within the local plan, and therefore that also gives it considerable weight. But you know, we're told that the site doesn't serve any green belt purposes, and I appreciate it's not the purest of pure green belt, but I'm very surprised that, you know, the view is being taken, it doesn't serve any green belt purposes. I would think there would be potentially a number. My question though is not really sort of convincing me I'm wrong on that, but presumably I'm right in saying that whatever I might think on the green belt, the fact that it's got this far in the local plan and being with the strategic officer saying it doesn't satisfy green belt purposes, that's the sort of reason. Or if I just think this is legitimately serving green belt purposes, that's significant enough for me to be able to vote a different way.
We've taken the view that it's not a green belt site, rather than it's a green belt site that we're seeking to release from, well, we're allocating in the local plan. And we've used, the members will remember some references to the Wedgwood judgment, which was a case in York, where this very issue was discussed, and the judge in that case said to determine whether a site is greenbelt or not, what you should do is you look at national policy for the greenbelts. You look at the 2005 local plan, what was intended there, the 2018 plan, and then you make a judgment on the reasons for including land within the greenbelt. So here, 2005 plan showed it, slightly complicated this, showed it as a greenbelt site, but as reserved land for development after 2011. And then the university allocation was an allocation within the greenbelt. 2018 plan moved on from that and didn't attempt to argue that the landscaping around the university within the campus should be part of the greenbelt. So we have a situation with a piece of land which is surrounded on 4 sides by urban development, with defendable boundaries. That's one of the keys of deciding where the greenbelt boundary should be. Is the boundary permanent? Is it obvious? Is it defendable? So I think we take the view that you have to leap over urban development with a defendable boundary to get to this site, which means that it's not contiguous with the rest of the green belt surrounding York in that described as a donut, in that donut shape.
Okay, councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I know you went through all the different access sites, but I was just wondering if I could clarify them again. So there's a field lane access that shall be fully constructed prior to first occupation of plots 146 to 150. Which one is that?
So it's this is the field lane access.
So is that pedestrian and cycle access only?
And emergency access.
Okay. And then
yeah.
And then there's another access point that references field lane as well. 3 metre wide unsegregated shared use cycle track pedestrian route. Hold on a sec.
Where are you reading from? Just my
Part B of condition 24 on page 54, which says it's a field lane / Tranby Avenue junction. I'm just wondering where that is.
Part B.
Yeah. The second part of part B. Run southeast quadrant of the roundabout, forming the whole road / field lane / Tranby Avenue junction.
Yeah, that's the shot on here actually. Is that this? So that's this off-site cycle path, shared footway cycle path where one doesn't exist at the moment. So that allows for a link from an off-street link, segregated link from the park and ride across this area of land that's outside the site. Then it dodges into the site, runs to the south of the boundary hedge, then pops out onto the adopted highway side of the hedge and skirts around the southern edge of Hall Road again. So it's to create that link there.
Do you have a more zoomed in plan so I can see how and where it enters the site and how it moves through the site?
That's on the does it show it? No, yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So
Okay.
so that's the offsite bit, which
Okay.
unfortunately covered by trees in that shot, and that's the on-site section, and then there's a punches through the hedge and is outside the site adjacent to the road there, and it joins up with the existing path. That's not good.
Always comes at the most opportune moment.
And what's the Kimberlow Rise access?
That's the main vehicle access to the site.
Right. Okay.
Off that roundabout, the photograph with the road going into the bank.
And how much of the woodland is to be lost at that junction?
About 700 square meters. 700 square meters.
Just while we're on that, and just to be clear, because I think there was some discussion about this cycle work path being 3 meters when it's within the site, and then at the point that it crosses outwards of the site, is that where it reduces down? Sorry, I'm going back to the first question. So where the cycle lane that comes along, yeah, up to the roundabout, is this the section where it reduces slightly in width?
I don't know the answer to that one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a different part.
Okay, we'll come to that. Any further questions on detail? Councillor Stewart again, and then.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so similar, local plan also.
No, I don't know anybody.
Just on the bit obviously that's not progressed yet, is there anything particularly notable why that hasn't progressed? And if there was, is there anything that would change the view of, obviously there's difference between the strategic site as proposed and, just these two. I assume the answer is that there isn't anything significant, but just to ask.
I think it's a land ownership issue. So I think the three parcels of land are in different ownership. So the applicant may be able to answer that question. We looked at it in terms of whether it causes an issue in terms of comprehensive development of the strategic site, but we think it's not material, or certainly not material enough to warrant seeking to refuse or defer it further. We think a discrete bit of land development there could just slot in quite comfortably.
Okay, I have councillor Fisher, followed by councillor Melly, followed by councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chair. I think I know the answer to this question is going to be no, but I'll ask it all the same. Obviously, this site has been removed from the green belt, proposed to be removed from the green belt and allocated for housing in the local plan. The local plan has been through inspection. Did the planning inspector make any comment about the allocation of this site and suggest that it could be removed from the green, should be returned in the green belt or not?
I'm happy for you to answer that question, but these are sort of questions that we need to get to when we get beyond the public participation, but do answer that, but it's just on detail of the plan really at this stage.
There's been no, well, we've been able to consult on the fact that this site can be included as an allocation. So we haven't received the inspector's final report yet, but indications are that this is a suitable allocation. They're happy for it to be included.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. And on this diagram, different roads have different colours. There's some grey and some red. Does that signify anything?
Great tarmac. Let me just zoom in. Didn't work. I'm not sure it is actually. The red is shared surface. It's showing a shared surface, although it does seem to have a footway as well around it. So I think it's just the finish of the surface, I guess. But yeah, I'm again, maybe the applicant can shed more light on it than I can from a quick read of the plan.
And my other question, which was sort of related, was it's come up a couple of times recently at planning about drop curbs and tactile paving. There's quite a lot of new road here, highway, adopted or unadopted, and also several wheelchair accessible houses. So is there a plan of where there will be crossing points and the nature of the tactile paving at those crossing points?
I don't have that detail.
Is that kind of conditioned to be? I couldn't see a condition to work out those details.
There is let me just see. There are areas which will be adopted and areas which won't be adopted. So tactile paving and crossing will be, and the adopted areas will be covered by that process, I would say. In the areas that aren't adopted.
Sorry. Do adoptable standards include things like requirements for crossing? Because I thought that was more to do with the quality of the surface and that sort of thing. Does adoptable road standards also include where crossings are needed?
Yeah. So that's yeah. So the answer is that the adoption process considers all aspects of the highway layout.
Okay, thank you. So there isn't a risk of it being developed with no crossing points, but meeting adoptable standards because it's got curbs and suitable surfaces, and then it being at the expense of the highway authority in the future to introduce.
What I'm going to suggest that we do is if you can just park that question,
Yeah.
because that's going a little bit beyond the detail of the plan.
Sure.
But when we get to officer questions, I'll invite Ian to come to the table and be able to give you an answer to that question if that's okay. Yeah. Okay, and then I had councillor Burton.
Question about parking. So is this the right bit of the meeting? Yes.
If it's on detail and clarification of the
Yes.
plans, then yes, it is.
Okay. Page 27, 5 points. 4.6, and each dwelling is provided with off-street parking. It says there are going to be 16 visitor parking spaces spread throughout the site. Will those include disabled parking spaces? Because I know from some of the newer developments in York, the disabled parking is a long way from the houses, so that disabled visitors can't visit the people in the houses unless there's a bit of negotiation of parking. And if it isn't, is that something that can be worked in?
We don't have that detail. We know where the visitor parking spaces are on the site plan, but yeah, then I'm not aware whether any of those will be specifically for people with disabilities.
Is that something that could be worked in, or put as a condition?
On previous applications, the answer, but I don't want to put words into officers' mouths, and this is again perhaps something to just clarify with the highways officer at that point. But on previous applications, where the highway is adopted, it's then subject to all of the same processes around if a disabled bay is needed to be allocated. Then there's a mechanism out with the planning that would enable you to do that. Where it's unadopted highway, it becomes at the discretion of the developer effectively.
And we can't stipulate that the developer provides anything on those similar
Essentially,
terms?
we're deciding on the plan that's before us.
Right, okay.
But if you want to just park
Yeah,
that question when the
okay.
highways officer's at the table,
Yes, yes.
then I'm sure we can get a detailed answer.
Because
to that as
it's not just about the parking space that goes with the house, and I was really glad to see that there were so many disabled houses sorry, I'm not quite myself today, that are not just for the houses that are designed for disabled people to live in, which is great. And the parking space, I presume, would go with that. But it's also visitors to the other houses as well as those houses, if that's taken into consideration. That's my point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just to expand on that slightly, the idea of the argument of the developer in terms of the number of visitor spaces was that this provides in curtilage parking, which should cover, they think should cover visitor requirements. Obviously, if someone has a children's party, that doesn't work, but that doesn't happen every day of the week. The visitor parking bays are all in the adoptable areas, so would be covered by the process to provide for parking for people with disabilities and other needs without relying on separate areas within the non-adopted highway. Can I just go back to Councillor Melly's question, if I recall it correctly? Condition number 19 covers the non-adopted highway. Members felt it was necessary. Wording could be added to that for it to include elements such as tactile crossings and things like that. But you might wish to make a note of that yourselves rather than relying on me to remember it.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I actually had quite a few questions that have already been answered, so thank you for those. The specific thing is the visitor parking. My reading of the bottom left side, if you're able to zoom in on the bottom left side, is that the visitor parking is just that lay-by opposite the street. When I looked at it previously, and I hadn't considered it in light of accessibility, which was bad of me, on the bottom left side, sorry, the other side. So that's got a number of bits dotted about, but the other corner, I think is it just those four at the bottom that are the visitor parking? Or is there other bits that I'm not?
5, 7, 3, not about that. 4, and then 5.
Yeah,
6,
so they're
7, 8.
all the other side of the road from the houses themselves. Just from that
Yes.
particular consideration, I hadn't thought about that ahead of time, but thanks for clarity. Thanks.
Okay, not seeing further hands for questions of clarity, so I will move us then on to officer update. First of all, there's 1 or 2 updates, aren't there?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of updates for this application, we have had additional consultation responses received from Strategic Planning Policy, who provide further detail with regards to the justification for the offsite contribution for the gypsy and traveller pictures. We've also received an additional representation from the York Traveller Trust, who questioned why on-site gypsy and traveller provision cannot be provided on site. We've also received additional information from Persimmon Homes with regards to their off-site search for gypsy and traveller pictures. And in terms of updates to the officer report, at paragraph 5.43 of the public report, we are missing a reference to a signalised crossing on Field Lane, which is required in addition to the signalised crossing on Hull Road. As a result of that, we're asking for an additional £150,000 for the crossing on Field Lane. So in total, the crossing contributions should come to £450,000. This has been agreed with the applicant. At 5.18 of the report, in terms of the first homes, we'd just like to clarify that the 30% discount is a minimum and it could go up to 50%. And this is subject to further negotiation with the developer. The first sale of first homes must be at a price no higher than 250,000. So we need to work out the exact percentage to make sure that that is achieved. In terms of the woodland planting at paragraph 5.64, the University of York have withdrawn the land available for the proposed woodland planting. Following discussions with the applicant, alternate land is available for 700 square metres of woodland planting, and this can be dealt with through the existing draft wording of the Section 106 agreement. So therefore, the references to the University of York within the report are therefore removed. The additional information has been assessed and the officer's recommendation remains for approval as set out within the public report. However, we need to update the recommendation to include the £450,000 for the crossings and delete the £300,000 requirements. That's everything. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. So I will move us on to public participation, and just to remind members, there is opportunity to ask questions on the update and the reports once we've gone through the public participation. So we have a number of people registered to speak today. Everybody has 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll invite you to come up to the table one at a time. And then if you can just sit tight just for a moment or two to see if any of the members have any questions that they wish to ask you. So the first person registered is Jeff Beacon, who is speaking in objection. So, Mr. Beacon, if you could switch your microphone on, and then you have 3 minutes. I'll give you a little heads up if I think you're starting to run out of time, and if you just want to speak in your own time.
Thank you, Chair. I presume that the council is abandoning its aim for York to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2030, despite the statement affirming this commitment made by the Lord Mayor at a recent full council meeting. For York to reach net zero carbon emissions, all York citizens must reach net zero. Developments like this one make it impossible. The plans for this site show many houses with parking for 2 cars. The part of the site earmarked for affordable housing has less. I've examined the underlying data used for the website carbon.place. This estimates the greenhouse emissions for each census output area in England. Plotting emissions against the car ownership for these census areas in York gives a graph that shows that carbon emissions for an extra motorist to be estimated at 13 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year. This trashes a fair remaining carbon budget in under 3 years. This means this development is contrary to the National Planning Policy Framework, which incorporates UN Resolution 42/187. This demands we must not ruin the planet for future generations. Large greenhouse gas emissions here will be ruining the climate. Setting aside climate considerations, This is the wrong place for affordable housing, which generates lower car ownership. Poorer people own less cars. Placing them in an area suitable for two-car households will mean less local services because motorists are less prone to use these services. They will jump into their cars and drive to out-of-town facilities. The area's nearest shop is a garage across a daunting carriageway. You wouldn't send your child across this even with enhanced pedestrian crossing facilities. Additionally, it is not an ideal site to wait for a bus or walk to the shops. If York is indeed abandoning its climate commitment, make this site for more affluent motorists and find other places better suited to affordable housing. If it is not abandoning the commitment, York's whole housing policy needs to be revised. Are there any questions? I'd be perfectly happy to help the head of carbon reduction understand the calculation I did with the carbon.place data.
Thank you very much. I will invite if there's any questions from members. But I'm not seeing any hands, so thank you for your time today. Okay, the next speaker is Mr. Andrew Mortimer, who's speaking on issues relating to the application. So again, Mr. Mortimer, you have 3 minutes to address the committee, and once you've done so, if you just hold on for a second and see if there's any questions, and start in your own time.
Okay, thanks very much, Chairman. I wanted to speak in support of the application in principle, but I have a few questions and observations to make. Firstly, I'd like to welcome the proposed condition 3, which removes permitted development rights to convert family homes into HMOs. It's very important on this site because this location is not included in the area already covered by the special supplementary planning document in York. So it is important that we go ahead with that, so please support it. I also welcome the improvements to the general off-site highways provisions, but wanted to seek clarification on a couple of issues. And I don't know if it's possible to put the off-site highways drawing back up, because I'll refer to a couple of those things as I go through. No? Okay.
No, I'm not going to.
So the first thing I really wanted to talk about was the issue that the officers have mentioned in their update, and that is the need for the signalised crossing on Field Lane, that for some reason kind of lost its way in the report. I want to highlight the need for that, and that's to point out to members, if you don't know the area, both Field Lane itself and Hull Road are 40-mile-an-hour speed limits on them, so they're very busy roads. And to cross Field Lane close to the roundabout with B&Q, you're actually crossing 3 lanes of traffic. There's 2 lanes as you come out towards Hull Road and 1 lane coming in. And it's really, really difficult. Now, if we're going to encourage people to use the new combined footways and cycleways to go towards Archbishop Holgate School, for instance, then that has to be a safe crossing of the road there. So I'm absolutely delighted that that's come back in, and would strongly support that you take on board that additional recommendation. The second high issue I just wanted clarification about, and that is the widening of the footpath that runs from the roundabout on the south side of Hull Road to Badger Hill Shops. In a number of areas, it's referred to as being widened to a 3-metre wide shared cycleway and footway, but in another location, it's referred to as a 3-metre wide cycleway and a 2-metre wide footpath. Now, my view is the first is appropriate because the whole length of this road will be a 3-metre wide shared path. To do this short section as a 5-metre wide one just doesn't fit in. And it's also going to take up the vast bulk of the verge down this part of Hull Road, which is only 6 metres wide. So it just seems excessive to put that in. So I would strongly encourage you to go with the recommendation that is at 3 metres wide, but it is confusing because the report mentions a couple of things.
We've got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, no problem. The final thing I wanted to ask you to consider, it was mentioned by one of the respondents, is please consider a residence parking scheme. You will not have a problem with disabled people being able to park on site because nobody will be able to park on site. This has uncontrolled parking as close to the new campus of the university as you got, and you can guarantee it's going to get filled up with people visiting the university unless you take action. It's going to be needed sooner or later, so please consider doing it now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If you just want to hang fire, just hold tight a second. I don't know if there's any questions from members. Not seeing, oh, gone, Councillor Stewart.
I don't know if it's one for the speaker or could somebody at some point sort of show on that map how far residents parking that's already there goes around other places? So it's brilliant.
Yeah, if you can hold that one
Yeah.
when we get to officers, and we'll I'm sure be able to go through that. Okay, any further questions? No, thank you very much for your time. So the next speaker I have is Ben French, who's speaking on behalf of York Green Party on the need for affordability in council housing. So again, Mr. French, you have 3 minutes to address the committee, and if you just hold on and see if there's any questions, start in your own time.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. To be really clear, we all want this developments like these to go forward, but they need to take in consideration more aspects like affordability. This application on paper ticks all the boxes of council and housing rules, but satisfies barely any of the desperate local need for real provision of genuinely affordable social rents, particularly in the east of York, as anyone that lives there knows. I note of the 153 developer homes planned for this application, just 49 will be affordable. Under local rules, obviously 30% must be developed for affordable housing, so Persimmon has done the absolute bare minimum in this case. When you dig deeper, only 39 of them will be at social rent levels, so that's just 25% at affordable levels. When we think about Tanghall, Oswaldwick and the east of York and the unique pressures and the brutal squeeze on the whole road area, partly due to student lets and Airbnbs engulfing a local area, this is surely insufficient for local residents. Let's be really clear. The majority of local residents will not be able to afford these developments. Now, as the committee knows, this is not a matter for planning, but surely highlights the flaws in taking the begging bowl to developers and expecting them to develop affordable housing. We need much greater teeth in affordability expectations within local plan improvements and within greater funding for Homes England. There are a number of other quick additional questions within this application. Local people want homes for local people, want affordable housing. Where are the protections to stop rentals and leases being engulfed straight into HMOs and straight into short-term holiday lets, which would surely exacerbate the issue? This needs to be included in local policy, and if not, why not? Will these be zero carbon homes? Will they be energy efficient? Will they be built to an appropriate standard? There is a reference to sustainable design by condition, but we need to see more clarification perhaps in some of these. Finally, there are some potentially helpful provisions for local sport provision, for example, with an unspecified 48,000 for sports facilities. Where will this go? Will this go within the local community, within the university, or within recreational spaces? And finally, there is the issue of potential risks and greater strain on storm flow, on the Beck flow, and greater drainage into Oswaldwick Beck, and the potential pressure that this would cause. Why has there not been greater funding provided by the developer for this? We really need more affordable housing, to be very clear, but this isn't it, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm just looking around the committee for hands. I'm not seeing any hands, so no questions. Thank you for your time. Just so that you're aware, my understanding is, and we'll confirm this from officers, but all of the houses will be built to C3, which is a domestic home category, and they have the permitted development right removed, which means that they would need planning permission to be able to convert to an HMO. Similarly, the houses that are sold at discount rent, I believe, have something put in that it means that future sales also have to be at discount as well. The next public speaker I have is Abby North, who's here speaking on behalf of York Travellers Trust. So as you'll have seen, you have 3 minutes to address the committee, and then if you just sit tight, if there's any questions.
Thank you.
You need the red lights on either side to be on and the little green light in front of you. That's it. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I'll be honest, I don't want to be here. I'd rather not have to be here, but we've come. Yeah, some of you might remember me from the local plan working group where I spoke about the planning policy for gypsies and travellers 2 years ago now, or sort of 18 months ago. And what I said was that this policy is not going to be enforceable. It's not going to deliver any sites, in so many words. So this application's been a brilliant example of that policy failure. And I have to say, you know, it's been interesting to hear what others have to say about the development. Certainly from our perspective, we don't object to the building of affordable homes or family homes in York at all. I mean, there's a desperate need for that. What I absolutely object to is the continuous kind of undermining of this policy H5, which is supposed to be providing pitches for travellers, which was always going to be overwhelmed by the needs of the many for the housing. So we've seen that happening in this application. I know, I mean, York Travellers, the officer report relies a little bit on the date of the submission to say that, you know, it wouldn't be reasonable to impose this policy because it was submitted in 2015. Submitted in 2015, validated in 2017, October 2023, there was a leaflet drop in the local area for a revised scheme. I do not buy it that there was at no point in the last, 9 years, an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation about this. And in fact, the previous planning officer, Victoria Bell, did write to the agent and ask them to do this. And we've heard in the last few days on the planning portal that the agent wrote back and asked for guidance. How should we make our site search? And got no reply. You know, like I say, this is extremely uncomfortable for me to be sort of having to object to the building of housing, because I absolutely don't. But what I think you need to do at this point, we're about to go, we're in the final, let's hope, all hope. This is the final consultation now for the local plan. You've got a choice today. We can show within the time scale of the consultation, we can give them detailed written evidence that the policy has failed through this application, or we can defer this decision for a couple of weeks to solve the problem. And I do believe the problem can be solved, but if it goes through without having dealt with this properly, I mean, if I wanted to win this argument, you're playing straight into my hands. I don't. I want to solve the problem. I want us all to make sure this policy H5 works, because I don't want to come back to planning committees over the next 20 odd years and say policy H5 doesn't work. Where are our travellers? Like, we don't need to do this over and over again. What we do need to do is work out exactly how we're going to make this work. And I agree with the developers, actually. I can see there is a desperate need for housing. The site is appropriate for housing. When you're looking at the plan of it, I don't see how you were going to get 3 pitches on there, to be honest. We needed off-site provision, or the council needs a plan.
You're just on your 3 minutes. So
Right,
if you want to just wrap up.
Or the council needs a plan. So I think there's a way that we can make this work for everybody. And it is through dealing with it as if it were a species of affordable housing, which is completely legitimate in planning law. So there's a case called Wenman. You can deal with traveller sites, affordable traveller sites as affordable housing. I understand the council has taken on the affordable housing stuff for this. So to be honest, I'm stopping now. This isn't, I don't think there's a problem with this plan, but I think there's a problem with you allowing it without having done this work to justify it properly at this moment in time. Any questions? Very welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I will invite questions from any members if anybody has any. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask you, if we had a policy that you felt did work, what would have differed in the process, and is there anything different in this application that you would have expected to see?
Well, in this application, the policy that should have been applied was that the developer should have given robust justification for why they were not able to put the pitches on site. Now, I don't think, based on the fact you want your green spaces, you want play areas, you want the housing, that wouldn't be too difficult to do. Then they needed to do a site search for alternative land. There's an email that's on the portal now that Mr. Whiteford asked for guidance on that, and nobody gave him any guidance. We would like to see the guidance, please. How are we going to look for the alternative land? But at the end of the day, the policy doesn't work. You've got a similar application over in Haxby, the application for ST9. Over there, they have gone all the way through the application saying we're not going to put them on site. And then finally, they've said, oh, actually, we will put them on site. We'll take a bit of the area that was going to be the cemetery. Instantly, I mean, I didn't print them out actually, and you can't see them anymore because they've been taken down. Instantly on the planning website, there are 9 or 10 racist and discriminatory comments that have just been published by the council on your website, So we've got a situation, and that's what we're going to get using this policy anyway. What we need to do is understand this is a species of affordable housing. Therefore, it is legitimate to provide it off-site using the GB2 policy. The council is only ever going to get commuted sum payments from developers who have, by the way, a statutory responsibility to make as much money for their shareholders as possible. The 106 obligations are not enforceable unless it is affordable housing. So it's actually, there's nothing wrong with the development. The policy needs to be, the council is going to take the money and this is how we're going to use it. So we're thinking about using the self-build register, which could work really well. I mean, I could talk to you for hours about what I think you should do about it. But in this case, what I think you need is decent conditions. For example, maybe a condition that says, like, before the 50th house is occupied, planning permission must have been granted for an alternative traveller site of 2 pitches. When you take it off-site, you give the developers opportunities to pool their resources and, you know, pool their obligations and stuff like that. Off-site is going to be a better provision. We need to make it work. That's what the council is responsible for. Listen, if it goes through with the kind of reasoning I've seen emerging over the last couple of weeks, the council's credibility is under some serious threat here. Come on, let's sort it, is what I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Any further questions from anybody? No. So thank you very much for your time.
Cheers.
So the next public speaker I have is Karen Madison, who's the Land and Buildings Manager at York University, and she will be joined at the table for any questions by Janet O'Neill as the planning consultant. Or if, I don't know if you want to come sit where you are. But okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Karen Madison and I'm from the University of York and I'm their Land and Buildings Manager. I asked to speak today on paragraph 5.64 of the original Planning Officer's report. Having read the update and the additional information report circulated at this meeting, the University of York has nothing further to add and we want to withdraw our objection. But just can I ask for that to be minuted as an update that the variations are going to be follow through. Thank you.
Yeah, no, we can make sure that that's recorded. If that was all you had to say, I'll just double check if anybody has any question for you. No, I don't think they do. So thank you for your time. Okay, we did have Councillor Baxter registered to speak in support, but I don't believe that she is here or available. So I will move us on then to Graham Whiteford, who is the applicant speaking in support. So you'll have seen you have 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a heads up if I think you're running over time, but then if you want to sit tight, I imagine there may be some questions for you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. I'm pleased to bring this application to the committee and to present these proposals for 162 high-quality sustainable new homes. As set out in the case officer report, the scheme has undergone significant changes since first submission in 2015. The scheme before you today has therefore been refined to address all consultee comments. The scheme provides a balanced mix of 1, 2, 3 and 4 bed affordable and market homes. 30% of the homes will be provided as affordable and either transferred to a registered provider or sold to first-time buyers at a 30 to 40% discount rate. Of the 162 homes proposed, 9 of these are secured for future delivery by self and custom builders. Each home will achieve the council's design standards on fabric efficiency and carbon reduction through a combination of air source heat pumps and improved cavity insulation. PV panels will also be provided and additional reductions on carbon emissions achieved over and above policy requirements. Existing landscape features, including established hedgerows and landscape corridors, will be retained with new street trees and tree boulevard entrances. Overall, these designs deliver a significant biodiversity gain of 68% and further woodland planting off-site on land within the City of York and controlled by the same landowner. Ideally situated next to Grimston Bar Park and Ride and with firm obligations to deliver new and improved public transport and cycling infrastructure in the immediate vicinity, future residents will have access to a range of public transport and active travel options. The site itself has been allocated and safeguarded for housing in every iteration of the local plan since 2005. More recently, at the local plan examination, the inspector found no fault with the site or its allocation. The government have rightly put housing delivery at the top of the agenda, reaffirmed in the King's Speech and in Tuesday's announcement on changes to the NPPF. The impetus to deliver housing on long-standing allocated sites in York has therefore never been greater. This scheme can be an exemplar of good design, inclusive consultation and collaborative working with the local authority. We're also pleased to commit to a period of exclusivity for both local people and key workers on open market dwellings before they go on general sale. This initiative has been welcomed in other parts of the country and is the first time we've trialled it in York. We're confident it'll be a worthwhile and well-used initiative, given over 80% of our first sales at Germany Beck are to those already with a YO postcode. Our own public consultations in Badger Hill elicited positive responses, with the residents seeking more information on prices, construction timetable and availability. This application will also deliver close to £3 million of investment into the local area. 1.48 million will be provided for local education, with other contributions going towards the NHS, bus stops and new pedestrian crossing points. In conclusion, this new development on land allocated for housing will provide high quality, sustainable new housing for local home buyers and make a real difference for people trying to buy a home here in York. Thank you for your time, and I'll answer any questions and pick up on the ones that might have been.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, if you could indicate if you have any questions, Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the list of section 106 contributions, and you mentioned a few. In relation to highways and transport, was consideration given to the developer making a contribution to fund a residence parking scheme in terms of reducing the risk of the visitor parking areas being abused as available parking for whether it's staff or students at the university or others working nearby?
Yeah, thank you. It's never been directly raised with us through the application by the council. There have been a few comments from residents living in Badger Hill where appreciate that it has been a problem in the past. My understanding of the problem there was compounded by the significant number of HMOs where you've got 4 or 5 adult students who all have a car and they might be able to only park 1 at the house, and then there's 3 on the street, but with additional people from the university who work there parking in the surrounding streets as well. I think on this scheme, you've got the restriction for it to be C3 use only. There's sufficient parking in Kerslage for all those people and 16 visitor parking spaces. But I recognise that when it's built out 10, 15, 20 years time, if the university continues to expand, it could become a problem in a roundabout way, saying that we're not averse to looking at a residence parking scheme and funding towards kind of a future referendum of our residents and whether it will be acceptable to them or not.
Okay, Councillor Colwick.
Thank you, Chair. I know that we're not considering the central section here. It's not part of this application, but I can't help but look at that and ask a few questions. For example, the design of the parcel to the west of this site and the placing of the visitor parking on the side of the road across from the development would inevitably prevent any development on that side of that road, both with the allocated parking and the trees as indicated there. Is that something that has been explored with whoever might be developing that section as yet to be developed? It limits possibilities and certainly limits the possibility of putting housing on the other side of that road.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. We have master planned it, so we've drawn the layout for that section that's missing there. There's an opportunity in between where you can see the pump station and the visitor parking to take the road to turn right into that parcel at that point. So you're not taking out any visitor parking. There's also the additional access point to the east of the site as well. So you could create a loop through that site. That's how we've master planned it. So there's an opportunity to do that. I think if and when it does come forward, I think that'd be the right way to approach it. Inevitably, you would take out a section of a tree or 6, 7 metre section of hedgerow that we would have planted, but that's not insurmountable and can be replaced on that central parcel of land.
Okay, any further questions, Councillor Rose?
Yeah, it's just on the back of my mind slightly about some of the public comments. It'd be good to get your take on them. There's a concern here that it is just housing, that we've got kind of the minimum number of disabled spaces, we've got minimum number of visitor spaces, and they're not really managed, that we haven't really got amenities here, and it's minimum climate expectations. I just wanted to get your take on whether those are fair comments from the public, or what your opinion is around those sort of aspects of it meeting the standards but barely, or whether you think you've gone above and beyond in those areas.
No, so I can take those. I've just put it out on the visitor parking. If on the disabled spaces, all of those spaces are within the adopted highway. They are surrounded by footpath or a hard margin, so there is an opportunity there through the Section 38 agreement that effectively they're wide enough to become disabled spaces and allocated as such if needed. The quantum of visitor parking as well, we've got 16 spaces on there to avoid that becoming, like I say, a car park. You do want to find that right balance, and because we're providing sufficient car parking within Kirtledge, those 16 spaces I think are justified and justified by highways as well. On the energy efficiency and sustainability, we can meet and exceed the requirements of the policy and the draft condition for carbon reduction against Part L 2013. So we've got 59% reduction in carbon emissions using fabric, which is basically your widened cavity, and air source heat pumps. So that's a 59% reduction against Part L 2021. The council's policy is 79% reduction against Part L 2013. So once you extrapolate it out, it's a much bigger reduction, or there or thereabouts. Once you add into the fact that we're also using solar on every property as well, that takes it much lower as well in your carbon emissions. So it will exceed those requirements.
Okay, Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. The local housing needs assessment recommends that 9% of dwellings be M4-3 wheelchair user dwellings, but it's 7.4% on this site. Is there a reason why it hasn't been possible to meet the 9% that's recommended?
Thank you. It was identifying the correct mix. So our M4-3 house types are 2 beds, and to avoid kind of a repetition of the same house type over and over again. We've got those house types as the M4-3. We've also, on the ground floor apartments, we've completely reconfigured those from the standard 2-bed apartments to turn them into 1 beds so that they are M4-3 compliant. So it's quite a difficult jigsaw to put together. If we hadn't made those changes to the apartments, we would be below that entirely. There is additional ground floor 2-bed apartments that, while they're not M4-3, they do meet the M4-2 standards, and every other property except the squint corner turning block are M4-2 compliant, which is in excess of.
Thank you. Yeah, my next question was going to be whether the wheelchair accessible vehicles are a mixture of housing types and sizes. So you're saying that some of them are 1-bedroom flats and some of them are houses with more bedrooms?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
they are, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Yeah, the under 50,000 for sports provision doesn't, on the face of it, sound a lot. You know, for example, we've got 10 times that amount on, I'm sure rightly, on the signalised crossings, and obviously we've got the 1.5 million on education, clearly showing there's going to be lots of young people about. So questions about obviously the amount itself, to say, just sounds low. It's all down as off-site provision. So is there going to be nothing at all in the way of any sort of, you know, kids play things squeezed in? And what will off-site look like? I mean, is it people going to go on the university? Is that quite a viable option, or a few things there?
Yeah, I think in terms of the amount, we've just given the figure by the council that this is the amount that we require to be delivered as an off-site contribution. We've agreed to that, and think the consultation response data could be spent quite widely around the city of York. I can't tell you exactly what it will be spent on because I don't know. That decision's probably not been made yet. In terms of play space within the site, there is a play area in the south east corner. It's like the oval shape. That's how the leap.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. On page 43, paragraph 517, it mentioned that there's a closed landfill site. Has full surveying been done to ensure there's no outgassing from that site onto this one, onto the residential development site?
Yeah, I can confirm that we've carried out phase 2 site investigation, gas monitoring, so there's nothing that prevents it.
Okay, a quick question from myself. I just wanted to clarify that there were no intended management fees or associated with this development in terms of upkeep of, any of the outside space that isn't adopted.
Unless the council adopted the open spaces for themselves, then there would be an annual fee for those open spaces because they would be managed by a management company, a third-party management company, and the land would be transferred freehold to them.
In which case, in terms of the affordable housing that's on site, do you envisage a discounted rate in terms of those management fees for any of that affordable provision?
Probably not on the first homes, but maybe on the affordable, the social rented apartments, but I can't confirm that. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Just on the point of general, I mean, on this development in general, as a developer, do you seek to, get councils to adopt everything, or is your default very much that there will be the management fee aspect of things?
It varies site to site and different local authorities. East Riding, for example, we just assume that they will adopt the open spaces, and we pay the maintenance 10-year maintenance fee for the council to adopt it. Say North Yorkshire don't particularly adopt open spaces anymore. So our default is that will go to a management company.
So for this development here, would you have rather there be a management company, or would you rather not be a management company?
It doesn't.
I'm not sure that's a fair
doesn't make well
in a sense.
It doesn't make a huge difference to us. Not really.
Yeah. Well, the reason for asking is obviously I would rather there weren't the management agreements, because it does create great inequality in a lot of areas.
No, I agree. I understand that entirely. I just think in terms of material to the decision and those sort of things. Further questions, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, it was only that I was going to ask the question, officers, but you're probably a better person to answer it around the adopted, unadopted highways, and then we've just talked about the space as well. Could you just clarify for us which bits are fully adopted and which bits are the unadopted?
Yeah, of course.
Aspects, if that's okay.
So the private drives, which are unadopted, sorry, okay, so just zoom in on that image. There are only 5 of those. So if you look on the northern boundary with Hull Road, if you get to the end of the T-junction, where it splits off to left and right, you've got quite a slightly thinner private drive. So that section there and that one, and then to the east of that as well, that one that goes around.
Okay.
And then to the south. So there's 5 sections of private drive. And I think when they say they're built to an adoptable standard, they're capable of taking a fire tender, full fire tender. I can't remember how many tons it is, but that's.
Is there a specific reason that those aren't adopted? Because they're effectively extensions of the road, even though they're sort of edge of driveways. I know there can be complexities around unadopted highways when you're then trying to get fibre in and all sorts of other challenges. So looking at that top left, the road continues round and it's got a number of driveways coming off it, but you're effectively calling the whole strip a driveway.
Yeah.
Is there a logic behind why that's been done here in only the places that are?
Yeah, of course. You're just reducing the amount of hard standing on a site quite significantly. It does give a more residential street feel, and like it says, it's a bit more private. So they're not through roads. They are just for people to access access their homes.
Would they not be not through roads if they were adopted though? Because it presumably it's the same road, right? It's just about whether it's adopted or not, that aspect.
It is, but you would have pedestrians up and down that street if it would be a through road. Your private drives tend to be about 4.5 meters wide. In York at the moment, all of your adopted surfaces are 5.5 with a 2 meter footpath either side. So you're just getting it's just a huge amount of hard standing compared to what would just be a private.
Councillor Melly, is that supplementary to that?
It is, thank you, Chair. Two supplementaries, if that's not too cheeky, thank you. So I think there's a condition that says the unadopted sections of road still need to be built to adoptable standards. So I'm just not completely understanding what you're saying about the reason that they would not be adopted is because they're at a different standard, or different dimensions and layout.
Don't know if the council might be better answering that question, but I can try my best. When the way that we interpret that condition is that adoptable standard is the construction of the carriageway, not the design above ground. So it has to be 5.5 meters wide with a 2 meter footpath either side. It's that the carrying capacity of that road can take a fire tender if it's needed. Some in the past, some private drives haven't been built to the best standards and kind of end up a bit wavy.
Okay, thank you. And my other question was about the unadopted roads, who would be responsible for maintaining them? Would it be the management company that also maintains the open spaces, or would each kind of property owner on that unadopted stretch own the area of road outside the house and be responsible for its maintenance?
The second one, the resident, the conveyance for their plot includes the private drives to the front as well.
So, sorry, another supplementary?
Yeah.
I was just wondering whether any of the wheelchair accessible properties are on any of the stretches of unadopted road that might then in the future be difficult to ensure that it's to an accessible standard, smooth and level if neither the developer nor the highway authority are responsible for maintaining it to a standard that wheelchairs and mobility scooters can actually get across it to get to the accessible properties.
I'm just going to look at the plan, and I don't think there are. The apartments, the ground floor apartments, are accessed by a parking court that would be private and maintained by the registered provider as well. So the first port of call as the freeholder for that area would be to the registered provider if it becomes unsuitable. But I think most, if not all, of the other plots that are M43 are accessed directly from the adopted carriageway.
Okay, I don't think there are any further questions. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So members, I'm going to move us straight on into questions for officers because I am conscious of time and us having another meeting that immediately follows this one. I'm going to just use a bit of my privilege as chair to just ask the first questions, which I'm going to direct towards Alison Cook, I think, to begin with. Obviously, there's this big question around policy H5, how it's been applied, the weight that's been afforded to it, the relationship between when the application came forward and when the policies have been adopted or modified, etc. If you can just talk us through the reasoning from the council's perspective as to how we've reached the point that we're at.
Thank you, Chair. So we've provided an update, which I'll cover as well in terms of that. But effectively, we felt in providing that update, we needed to clarify the policy position in terms of how that was presented from our perspective. And just to clarify that we don't consider that the approach is wholly policy compliant that has been in terms of how the applicant has approached the application. And that's because we don't think, to our knowledge, and I'll say that there's no justification for how they haven't designed, why they haven't designed the pitches into the scheme, and their site search was quite limited in terms of the sites that they were looking at. However, in looking at this application in particular, we've looked at the policy approach from the local plan. We've considered when the application was submitted and the changing and evolving policy landscape that has taken place during the duration of that time. And it has changed in terms of how we've applied policy and the requirements for the policy to deliver in terms of gypsy and traveller provision. In where we are today, the policy has a limited weight. Policy H5 has a limited weight in terms of how it can be applied to applications. And that's because we still have outstanding objections to the policy approach as outlined by Ms. North in her presentation. Currently we're undergoing consultation on that policy, which will be resolved by hopefully resolved by this consultation and further steps taken by the planning inspectors in terms of their consideration of those responses. Given that approach, and having said that we don't think it's wholly compliant, we do think that it is acceptable in this case because of that, that we can accept the contribution in terms of it in lieu of on-site delivery. And we think that that is consistent in the policy approach, taking consideration of the limited weights of the policy that can be applied, but also in terms of the SIL regulations and the tests to meet that contribution. We think that is also has been achieved, and there's precedent set by previous decisions to state that that is acceptable. So is that satisfactory?
I think that's a good starting point. So just so that I'm clear then, what I think you're saying is that were this application to have come forward with the policy having the full weight, it wouldn't be compliant with the policy, and if it had the full weight, it would likely then be refused because it didn't comply with the policy.
That's correct. So the approach to the policy is that it should be on-site delivery primarily, or delivered via alternative land, and only such as those are demonstrated to be unviable or that cannot be achieved on site would we accept in the future an S106 contributions for delivery. At this point in time, given that we can't add significant weight to the policy and it's limited, particularly as we're out to consultation at the moment on that policy wording, we think it's acceptable that we accept the S106.
And so just to be really clear about timeline as well then, so this application was first put forward in 2015. I think the public speaker said was validated in 2017. There were then some detailed submissions, I think around 2021. Concurrent to that, we had the local plan submission in 2018. So after the initial application had been validated, but prior to the detail of the application. We've then had some modification to policy H5, such that where it is now is not where it was in 2018, presumably, if there was modifications put forward. So those modifications came after this application, effectively as we see it before us, was brought forward to the planning authority. Is that?
Yes, absolutely. So you're right, the local plan was submitted in 2018 and the wording of that policy was very much or, so it was provide on-site or off-site or accept a contribution. We've tightened up the wording in terms of the modifications process as a result of going through the local plan examination to make sure that when that policy is invoked with significant weight from adoption, it would lead to on-site provision, alternative land for provision in advance of considering any S106 contribution. So the policy has changed over the course of that time, and we've been through three sets of consultation on modifications that have involved this policy. The consultation currently ongoing to the end of the month is focused just on this policy as directed by the inspectors.
Okay, I will come to you in 1 second, Councillor Melly, with a supplementary. I just want to be just really kind of black and white and clear in terms of so we're clear that had this application come forward at a later date with, you know, certainly with an adopted plan, but, you know, possibly even with the modifications as they are, we would be able to apply more weight to the existing policy, which it's not compliant with. than we currently are. That's the first part. And then the second part, and I don't know whether this is for the solicitor or for yourself, but just in terms of what we are able to do as a committee, in terms of the weight that we could or couldn't apply, you're very clear that the weight that can be applied to this policy at this moment in time, with the timeline of this application, is limited. And therefore, in terms of where we would be in terms of if we were to do anything other than the officer recommendation, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but if you can perhaps just tell us, give us your clear advice in terms of that, so that we're very clear.
So had we got an adopted local plan, and this application came forward, we would have objected. We would have said this policy, we would have objected on the basis that this application wouldn't be policy compliant to policy H5, because it hadn't designed in the delivery of pitches, and it hadn't identified alternative suitable land for delivery. So we would have said that it was not policy compliant on that basis. We are saying that it does have limited weight, and the reason being that the outcome of the consultation that we're in at the moment could potentially change the wording again in terms of how the policy could be put forward in the adopted local plan. And we won't know how that will be put forward until we receive the inspector's report.
Because I think probably a lot of us around the table will have every sympathy with the Travellers Trust position, that this is what they said would happen, and this is what is happening. And I think, you know, there'll be a number of us around the table will want to be very certain that, first of all, we don't want to keep seeing this happening, but also secondly that you know, have we bottomed out every last bit of wiggle room that we possibly have as a planning authority to ensure that we're doing everything we possibly can to ensure that traveller pitches are included on site in strategic locations such as this.
Yes, so and to acknowledge the points that Ms. North made, this policy has been through an extra phase of examination, specifically looking at the application of it. Is it sound? How could it be modified? And we've had a concluding letter from the inspectors in respect to that, in terms of how they see the policy approach should be made sound. That is what we're currently consulting on, and that's very clear that the policy should include provisions to make sure it's on-site provision, alternative land, as a first point in the application process, and only if this is demonstrated that it cannot be delivered, we would entertain an S106 contribution in the future. So the trigger point here in terms of the weighting of the policy and how we apply that policy will be the adoption of the plan.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Melly with a supplementary, and then is that also supplementary, Councillor Stewart?
Thank you, Chair, because I also, you know, when I was reading this report, was struggling to understand what policies we could apply and how much weight and how the timeline all fitted together, because all of the report and all the policies that, you know, are in this report are all in the 2008 local plan. So there's some policies like biodiversity net gain that we're being told we can't apply because they were introduced after this application was submitted. And, you know, some policies we're being told we can't apply because they haven't been adopted, like the Gypsy and Traveller one. And then all the other policies we're being told do apply and do have weight, even though they're all part of the 2018 plan, which also came and was also submitted after the application was submitted, and which also aren't adopted. So I'm really struggling to understand which policies we can't apply because they're not adopted and they were introduced after this application was submitted, and which policies we can apply. And considering that Gypsy and Traveller provision and biodiversity net gain, you know, it's all to do with the qualities and climate and environment, which are supposed to be core principles that we take into account in every decision we make in the council, and yet they're the ones that seem to be singled out as we can't apply them. And I'm just struggling to understand what policies apply with what weight. It seems this application seems much more complicated in that regard than most applications that come to this committee. So I would appreciate more clarification than you've already given, because I'm still not completely understanding it.
So some of the policies that came forward, so obviously a lot of the policies are in the plan. Obviously, in terms of where we are with the submission of the local plan in 2018, there's been significant modification that has come through the process since that point. So we did our modifications consultation. So I'll skip from 2018 to 2023, if I may, in which we had 4 phases of hearings. And as a result of those hearings, we agreed schedules and modifications with the inspectors. All of those were consulted on in spring last year. And some of those policies that we consulted on continued to receive significant objection, and others hadn't received significant objection. Some of those policies that hadn't received significant objection, we can now apply with some more weight because we know what the commentary is on those and how they can be applied. This policy has continued to receive significant objection, and like I said, has been through a further phase of hearing, and we're now consulting on those changes. So in respect of this policy, we can be very clear that it's limited. With the weight of other policies, the biodiversity net gain, I haven't looked at the detail of certain other policies, but there was a national implementation of biodiversity net gain, which wouldn't apply in this case. But I would expect that the policies set out in the plan with regards to green infrastructure to be applied in this case. I don't know if that's
just, and I'm just going to jump in ahead of Councillor Stewart. Just, I suppose, to bottom it out as well in terms of, because that's helpful in terms of, you know, the various different policies and how the objections do or don't apply to them. Would this, and you may not be able to answer this, apologies, would this application have been compliant with policy H5 as submitted in 2018? Were there not objections to it?
Yes. In the case of the 2018 base policy, it was asking for on-site or alternative or contributions. So it would be compliant with against the 2018 as submitted plan.
So it would, yeah. So it complies to that. The policy has subsequently been tightened up to stipulate on-site provision as the default position, and as I understand it, it has to be quite a high bar to not be on site to meet that test of H5 now. But because those modifications have come later, that's why they don't apply in this instance.
And because we're ongoing
have the weight.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, sort of two, if that's all right. The first one is there any significance to the fact it's not the whole site? You know, obviously it's a strategic site, and we're looking at just under 3/4 of a strategic site, i.e. presumably or hopefully the local plan is all going to be signed off. And then after that, H5 is going to be coming into being absolutely. And then after that, the remaining part of the strategic site is going to be potentially developed. So does that complicate it? And do you want a second one now? Second one's a stupid one, which is what are the rules on self-build, i.e. you can see where it's going. What's to stop, you know, 2 self-build people building traveller pitches on, you know, on their self-builds?
Well, taking the self-build one, the self-build plots, as I understand it, will be on the open market and will be designed for the occupier. So that can come forward. The difference, I would say, in terms of the self-build is that we would be expecting probably C3 dwelling houses in terms, and it's a land use argument. So it would be C3 dwelling houses if it's bricks and mortar. If it was coming forward as a gypsy and traveller pitch, that's a different land use with slightly different requirements. But essentially, those would be on the open market. It could come forward to meet the needs of the person that buys that.
But on that, are we expecting or are we requiring? Because I thought from this paper it was 9 self-builds and the only thing we're approving was access. But are we going to say C3? Or are we expecting it will be that, but could it be 2 traveller pitches?
The outline part of the site is still controlled by the all-encompassing planning permission. So they would be considered to be, anything coming forward would have to be under the C3 use class. So it would be self-build and custom plots. as under the definition of C3, I would say. So I think anything outside of that would require a new planning permission, I would say. I can't think of a circumstance where a Gypsy and Travellers plot would. It's still a dwelling house. I can't answer the question. Sorry. It's. I'd have to think about it in a bit more detail.
I'm afraid I can't take anything from the public gallery. I'm sorry.
So my understanding is that Gypsy and Traveller pitches fall under the sui generis use. So under sui generis use, not a C3 dwelling house.
Is it expected or required? And there was a point about the question about the proportion of site. Is that significant or not?
I was just gonna add, someone from the Gypsy and Traveller community buying a plot, building a house and occupying it is within the C3 use class. So that would be in accordance with the planning permission. If they bought two of the plots and developed one house, yeah, I'm not quite sure how that would work in terms of the planning permission. I would think it would be in accordance. There's no requirement that they have to build 9. We've granted planning permission for 9, but if it turns out there are fewer come forward, then that wouldn't inherently undermine the planning permission that we granted.
And on the point that Councillor Stewart raised around the broader site and the bit that's missing, I suppose the question is this proportion of the site that we're discussing at the moment, is there any consideration going to change any requirement on the other portion of the site, given that will it still be treated as a strategic site, therefore H5 applies, or is this now the sort of the sum of the obligation under H5?
But I would anticipate it still being treated as part of the strategic site.
So there may be an obligation on, as and when that part of the site comes forward, to provide some form of on-site provision, because by the time that comes forward, it would come forward as a application under the hopefully adopted local plan.
Yes, bearing in mind that we have applied thresholds as part of the policy approach. So the thresholds kick in at 100 dwellings and over. And my understanding is that that parcel wouldn't come forward with 100 dwellings and over. So the burden applies to the majority of this parcel of the site.
We already have an application in on that site. So it wouldn't be it wouldn't be an application with a 24 or a 25 or 26 suffix. It still has a 2015 submission date.
So I've got one or two supplementaries. Councillor Stewart, I'll come back to you because we're just discussing that point. No, I'll come if you want to come in on this.
Sorry,
and then we'll come.
Yeah, and then I'll shut up. But sorry, just on that point, Alison, what you said about the thresholds, with it being a strategic site for about 200 and the threshold being 100, then logically couldn't a developer, for another strategic site, keep pinging forward 99 houses, 99 houses, 99 houses, if that gets them round the on-site provision requirement and they want to get around that.
That's maybe a question for another day, is it?
I can answer that,
absolutely.
so.
I think we'd apply in the same way that we look at schemes which come in, which appear to be part of a larger site, which come in under the affordable housing threshold. We would look into the background of why they've been submitted in that way, and if it was seen as being done to undermine the comprehensive nature of the development, then we'd presumably look negatively at that.
Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 supplementary questions. One of them, again, it's another question about the timeline of this application, because you know, constitutionally, applications of this size and of this number of dwellings are supposed to be committee decisions rather than delegated to officers. So I was just wondering why the recommendation is to delegate to officers the details of the Section 106 agreement and the conditions, rather than considering, you know, this application was submitted 9 years ago and it's taken a really long time. Why hasn't it been delayed a month or 2 or 3 to come into this committee until it's ready for us to make a decision? Because all the conditions in the 106 Section 106 contributions, I think, are quite fundamental to the planning balance and whether it's acceptable development or not, and they're subject to change. You know, you provide a lot of indicative information, but not the final conditions. So I was just wondering if if you'd explain that.
I think this is no different to the way we apply any application with a Section 106 agreement. We word it exactly the same way. So it is always delegated because there are decisions that have to be made outside of the committee in terms of when the agreement's signed, for example. We don't come back to committee to say it's signed, can we issue the decision notice? And also in the negotiation, sometimes there needs to be decisions which vary what have been put before members, and then it's a judgment call as to whether they are variations that need to mean that we have to come back to committee to seek authorization, or whether they're officer decisions. I mean, sometimes it can be as simple as a number transposed and things like that. Or you get a fundamental issue that comes up with land ownership, which perhaps truncates. This is not a comment on this case, but you might have a proposal to provide a footpath cycle where we say it's between point X and point Y. There's a land ownership issue or a services issue, which means actually it can't get to Y, it can only get to Z. Do we come back to committee to say we're only getting as far as Z, or do officers make the decision to make that variation? So it's no different. You look back through any of the cases, they've got Section 106 agreements, they're all set out in the same way.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, this recommendation is also delegating the decision on the schedule of planning conditions as well. So
same reason, was we, heaven forbid, but we have had Section 106 negotiations that have gone on for months and years, and sometimes there will be a change in legislation, which means that the condition perhaps needs to be reworded. The reasons need to refer to a different part of the NPPF, and it just to save them coming back to committee and taking up committee time when it's just a technical change that doesn't get to the heart of the planning permission. If there was a change which got to the heart of the planning permission, then we'd bring it back to committee, but generally it isn't.
okay, thank you for that explanation. Can I ask my other supplementary, which was related to Councillor Stewart's questions about the self-build plots being used for gypsy traveller pitches or houses? I'm just trying to understand. So how do you say it? Sui generis? Is that how you, yeah? And so were you saying that would require planning permission for change of use from C3 to sui generis? And in which case, how does that fit with kind of short-term holiday lets and that sort of thing, which are also that same sui generis use class that, as I have learned from planning in my ward, you don't need planning permission for often for change of use?
I prefer to say not in a use class, because I don't like officers using Latin in reports rather than sui generis, but there you go.
I've never studied Latin, that's why I don't know how to say it.
If something's not in a use class, a pitch for gypsy travelling community sui generis use. Bricks and mortar house, regardless of who lives in it, is within C3 use class. So the self-build plots coming forward and develop for someone from the gypsy and traveller community, or falls under that definition, would be within the planning permission. A pitch.
I would say that a pitch wouldn't fall under the same definition as a C3 dwelling house, which would be covered by this permission. So if a member of that community wanted to develop that as a bricks and mortar home with ancillary parking, for example, for their caravan, or for example, that it's within their design of that plot, but the main focus would be on the house, a C3. Whereas, as Gareth said before, it would be the change in permission to change the land use of that plot if it came forward as a pitch. Which
I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, but from the consistency, I just can't take any comment from the gallery. Okay. I'm going to come to Councillor Rose for your supplementary.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thoroughly educated about the current exact point in time stance of Gypsy and Traveller policy on this, and thank you very much for all those details. I guess I'm just trying to get my head clear around it, and there are obviously things that aren't specific to this application that aren't really considerations here. So, I mean, even just without trying to categorize the bigotry, I think the fact that we're calling them bricks and mortar homes, and there are other types of homes that just don't count in the same way, and you have to do a bunch of having, sounds awful. It's not relevant to this, but there's other problems as well. And as a council and as a city, it sounds like there's a lot we need to do for the Gypsy Traveller community to get better at that stuff. And when this policy passes, things will be in a slightly different position as well in terms of what we can and can't consider. But I just want to get your specific stance on, as things stand. I know we've heard all the different aspects of it and the limited weight bit. What does limited weight mean in this context? Does that mean that the fact that we've had a policy that has reached this point because it simply wasn't good enough in the past, and now we've got a policy that would mandate things, but it's not quite there yet, we're giving not quite as much weight, but almost as much weight, because we know it's got to be that or stronger going forward? Or are we giving it zero weight at all? It has absolutely no bearing on this whatsoever, because it's a pretty binary thing on this, whether it is either a major problem or it's no problem. There's no, well, you know, I guess it's a thing to consider. So I just wanted to get your stance on, should we disregard all of the Gypsy and Traveller concerns around this specific application, even though there's a lot for us to do outside on other things? Or is it something we should be taking into consideration?
So the provision to provide for the Gypsy and Traveller community.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you 1 second. I'm happy, sorry, just to the back of the room. I'm really happy for you to have a conversation, but could you just go through the back door or something, just because we can can hear it. Alison.
So the provision to provide has always been in policy. So we've always had a policy to deal with Gypsy and Traveller provision, but those provisions have changed. So like I said, we've strengthened how we would deliver those in adopted plan. The limited weight in this circumstance is simply because we are currently out to consultation on revised wording, where we've had modifications suggested by the inspectors, which is now in progress. We may see that policy come to fruition as part of the adopted plan, but at this moment in time, it could be subject to change. I would say that the reason it's limited, how you should consider that policy, is that there has always been a requirement to provide. In this instance, as I said before, we don't think they're wholly policy compliant with the current approach, which is the modified approach, where we set that on-site provision, alternative site provision, and in worst case scenarios, effectively a contribution. There is flexibility at this point in time with in relation to where we are with the plan and that situation with the limited weight, to allow us to accept the S106 contribution at the moment to enable policy compliance at this stage.
Okay, I think that's probably an appropriate point to say, ultimately, we have to make a planning judgment ourselves as a committee. We've, I think, fairly interrogated how we've got to where we are. There is obviously the off-site commuted sum, which is being put forward as part of this application. But I think what we probably need to do now is get into any other questions on any other aspects of the scheme. So I've seen Councillor Fenton and then Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Hopefully a straightforward question. Just to clarify my understanding of the the additional cycle path provision. So there'll be a shared use cycle footpath, which is the new bit that pops through the hedge, runs along the northern boundary of the site, and pops back through the hedge and onto the existing shared use cycle and footpath. And that takes you down to the roundabout, the big roundabout, I'll call it. And then beyond that roundabout, between that point heading towards Archbishop Holgate School, that's where there is a new segregated cycle and footpath provision, which provides that new facility between those 2 points. Have I understood that correctly?
So it is in the condition. Condition 24. 3 meter wide, unsegregated shared use cycle track pedestrian route.
Yeah, it's paragraph 5.40 talks about the 3 meter shared use.
Yeah.
Then goes on to talk about the 3 meter and 2 meter.
Yes.
So does that need to be added to the condition, or does it not need to be?
My understanding is it's 3 meter shared. Not quite sure where the 3 and 2 came from. Ian might be able to help.
I better just introduce, so we've got Ian Stokes from Highways has just joined us at the table.
Yeah, so Ian Stokes, Principal Development Control Engineer, Highways. The confusion, right? There is an element for some confusion to creep in because opposite, I think it's Cadnam Avenue, is the start of a segregated shared use cycle path footway. But to the east of that is currently just 1.5 to 2 meter wide footway. So what we're doing is widening that 2 meter footway to be a 3 meter unsegregated shared use to where it meets the segregated shared use path opposite Cadnam Avenue. And then from the roundabout heading eastward, it's all a 3 meter unsegregated shared use path. Does that clarify things?
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Stewart was next.
Thank you, Chair. The under 50,000 sports vision off-site doesn't sound a lot. What do we think that will look like in more detail, please? i.e. £300 a house. So yeah, so page 46, under 50,000 for sports provision off-site, £300 a house doesn't sound much at all. What do we think that will look like in terms of what's provided?
It's covered in the report. So we can only require contributions where they're necessary, reasonable to allow the development to go ahead and reasonable in planning terms. So I think, as written in the report, it points out that there is an over provision of sports facilities in this this ward. So that is then turns into an amount of sports provision that is required by this development, taking into account the over provision, which is then translated into a contribution, which is the contribution we've come up with. And there are suggestions. Sorry, I'm just struggling to find where it is. Which number, sorry? Yeah, from the sports team, 3.16, page 10. So improvements of sport or access leisure off-site at Osbaldwick Sports Club, University of York Sport Village, Hull Road Park, and or another project within the ward or connecting wards, the need for which directly arises from the development. So that would be decided on when we get the money, and we looked into projects to improve access or improve facilities that are existing, and usually in consultation with ward councillors and local groups.
Okay, Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. On page 28, paragraph 5.52 says that policy WM1 of the draft local plan requires the integration of facilities for waste prevention, reuse, recycling, composting and recovering in association with the planning, construction and occupation of new developments for residential uses. But then I couldn't see anything anywhere in the report that explains what facilities for waste prevention, reuse or composting are integrated into this development. Is that policy complied with?
For houses with space for waste and recycling facilities, and then there are communal facilities for the flats.
What about waste prevention, reuse and reuse?
So for that policy for residential, we asked for sufficient space for each house to have normal waste and recycling waste. So they just need sufficient room. And then we put a condition on asking for it to be for the apartments, because obviously they're larger. We need communal spaces for normal waste and recycling. So that's how we've done it in this case. So we've put a condition on to secure that.
So that's policy compliant in terms of waste prevention and reuse.
That's usually what we'd ask for, yeah, in terms of waste management, recycling and normal waste to be provided for residential properties.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I've got sort of three areas, but it's the same question, if that makes sense. So on HMOs, Airbnb and parking res park, based on the conditions we've got in front of us today, what are people able to do? Are we in a situation where you could have a member of staff from B&Q or from the university go and park permanently in one of the spaces and there's nothing that can stop them from doing it? Could we have every single house sold to people who want to immediately convert all of them to Airbnb, and then we have to scrap through that based on, you know, over the coming months, and ditto for HMOs, that they'll just all be immediately snapped up by people who want to be the first to get in because they might be a percentage at some point? Well, what's the current situation, and what conditions would we be able to put in place to stop any of the potential problems that we might get from those?
So first question was parking.
Yeah, parking, HMO and Airbnb.
But so in terms of parking, if the site doesn't have parking restrictions, then anyone can go and park on the adopted highway, as long as they're not causing obstruction. So to prevent parking on site, or to limit it to certain hours, or have it as residential parking, you would need to introduce a traffic regulation order, which could either be done post-development when problems have occurred, or you can do it pre-development as part of the adoption process. HMO use as a planning condition. So as it stands, there's an HMO is different to a C3 dwelling house. So these are granted permission for C3 dwelling houses. HMOs are in C4. There's a permitted development right, which allows change of use from C3 to C4 without planning permission. In York, we have an Article 4 direction which removes that permitted development right. That's only applied in the urban area, and this site is outside the line of the Article 4. So as it stands, without a planning condition, once they're built and occupied, they could then be sold for C4 use. But there's a planning condition, condition 3, which again effectively does the job of the Article 4 in removing that permitted development right. So you'd have to apply for planning permission and we'd apply our HMO policies and those thresholds and what have you to any planning application we got for change of use. Short-term lets slightly more complicated because short-term lets don't fall into a specified use class. And certain circumstances could be considered to be within C3. But generally we consider, and most of the authorities consider, commercial, 12 months a year letting for short-term occupation to be a change of use. And we would require planning permission for that, and that would be judged on its merits. Although we don't have a specific policy to cover that at the moment.
Supplementary, if that's all right. So on the condition side, the only thing that we could really put a condition on that we don't already have in place would be about the putting in place res park in advance, effectively. Could I just ask a quick supplementary? If you could put up the map quickly on.
Turned off the.
Oh, sorry.
We've turned that off. How do we turn it back on? Might take a while.
Apologies. I mean, I can refer to the map without it. I think people can picture the map, but
well, we do have them in the.
They're in the papers.
In the papers, yeah.
At the bottom of the housing, there is that first kind of lay-by parking, if you like, next to the bottom left plot, and there's that sweeping road round. Is there anything to stop cars from parking all along the south side of that road? Between where I reckon you could probably park 20 cars along that space with enough space for cars to get. I think that middle stretch there. I know it's not marked as parking, but is there anything to stop? I mean, I can see there's kind of the chicane bits on it, but if you're not obstructing, presumably anywhere that isn't marked as parking there, you could park along there. Currently, there's no plans for double yellows around the whole thing and all that sort of stuff. Just wanted to clarify that aspect of it.
Not at this stage, but that's the sort of thing that usually comes through the adoption process, where areas which require yellow lining for visibility purposes or to allow larger vehicles to get around corners and things like that can be yellow lined. And that would normally be the approach for restricting parking, residence parking. The requirement for developments, residence parking from developments is usually because the scheme we're looking at is likely to generate parking in surrounding residential streets, for example.
Yeah.
Rather than
this
is kind of in reverse, which
all parking
is a situation we haven't really had from my memory, because residence parking is normally it's residents' choice through a referendum. After it has become an issue. So I think our normal approach, our usual approach would be to put in restrictions on perhaps the visitor parking through the adoption process and yellow lines where yellow lines are required, rather than trying to introduce residence parking at such an early stage. I don't know, I'm looking at you, Ian, now. I don't know how we cover visitors parking normally.
The difficulty with this one is that the visitor parking is provided to visitors of dwellings there. So, you get the number of people per household that have their parking spaces, and the applicant has said that the actual on-site parking provided at each dwelling is sufficient to allow for visitors. The query here is whether University of York parking will transfer from the areas where they are currently experiencing problems and add to the problem of this development, in which case we would be seriously in discussion with the applicant through the Section 38 agreement process for the applicant to consider what parking management measures would need to be put in the development to avoid any ire from residents of the new development that people from the university are parking there, if it can be proved that it's people from the university or having a business at the university parking there, in which case you need to do parking surveys, as have been done in Badger Hill now, to identify who is parking and where those people are from. And then currently the university pays for the resident parking scheme and the enforcement thereof.
Okay, Councillor Stewart, I think you had a supplementary on that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just because I mentioned Res Park as well, and I sort of said I'd be interested to see where they are. But having thought about it, and further to Gareth and also Ian's comments, you know, I do think that, as you said, the adoption will get maybe some double yellows around the chicane and that sort of thing. But the Res Park issue, I broadly see as if the developer wanted it, then they could sort of go in hard at this stage. But otherwise, it's just a simple thing about once the houses are occupied, if it is an issue, and you'd think it would be an issue, then obviously you can have the res parking, and I don't think we should particularly tie ourselves in knots with what form res park should take, in my view.
Okay, I've just got one question that I'm going to ask of you. It's a different question you've got there, Councillor Millie. Go on, I'll let you ask
You can go
questions. No,
first.
I'll save mine till last.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I had a question about on page 22, paragraph 5.26. Which says the construction of each self and custom built dwelling shall be completed within 24 months of purchase. And then is that in the conditions? Is that intended to be in the conditions? I couldn't find it. If that is intended to be conditioned, then I have questions about it. But if it isn't, then I'll say I won't bother. If it isn't conditioned, then why is it in the report saying that it will be the case?
I have a feeling it's in the marketing document, the marketing strategy. If you give me 5 minutes, I'll just double check that.
Yeah, I mean, my question about it was just that we don't usually condition the completion of a development, just the starting of it. And I assumed that was to do with legal restrictions that meant we couldn't condition it. And I was just wondering if that could lead to very strange situations where the self-build plots are built, but none of the rest of it is built up yet, apart from maybe the road infrastructure. And in that case, is it reasonable to condition the completion of those plots and not the other plots?
I tell you what I shall do, Councillor Melly, as whilst Natalie and Gareth are sorting out the answers to that question, I will ask the question I was going to ask, which is to Ian. And then perhaps by the time that Ian's answered my question, you might have got to the conditions or the relevant bits. So my question was just on page 26, paragraph 5.44 around the travel plan. And the travel plan targets a 10% reduction in single occupancy vehicle trips. But the council plan for the whole city is a 20% reduction in overall car journeys. And I just wondered why only a 10% reduction? I appreciate the difference between single occupancy versus overall trips, but how do those two things sit together? And is 10% reduction ambitious enough, I suppose, is the nub of the question.
10% is what might typically be achieved through residential travel plans. So in that respect, it seems as a achievable target. The other thing to consider is the date that the application was submitted was well in advance of the local transport strategy that's recently been published. So there's a time lag element between the policy position where the application was made and what the council's position is now. So if it would be a question of members feel that that's a reasonable travel plan target given the council strategy since the application was made.
So I suppose in a way that almost comes to the question, and without going back over any of the local plan and waiting and all the rest of it, I believe that the 20% reduction was part of the council plan rather than the local transport strategy, and then the transport strategy fits to the headline figure. But obviously neither of those things are part of the local plan in terms of weighting and what have you. So in one sense, is it reasonable to even ask for 10%? But if it is reasonable to ask for 10%, is there a reason why it wouldn't be reasonable to ask for 20%?
20% would be very challenging. It's in a very sustainable location. The applicant is providing off-site works for improved cycle and walking connections, and also providing a bus stop on the site. So much more of the development will be accessible to public transport services than what was the case without that bus stop being provided next to the site. So, you know, those measures that are being put in place and the contributions that are being sought could help achieve more than the 10% target, but the target is what we consider to be a realistic, achievable one. It's up to members to decide whether they feel that's what they wish to achieve or more, but we reckon that is probably a realistic expectation, but challengingly, it could go higher than that.
Okay, thank you. Is that supplementary on that, on your previous question, or something different? Okay. If it's not going to involve Gareth and Natalie, then yeah, I'm quite happy to go with the highways question quickly. I am very conscious, by the way, members, that it is 4:10. So I'm happy to bottom out material planning questions, but at the same time, I'm also conscious of time.
I mean, I think I've only got 2 more questions and then I'm done, but I'll ask the highways one first, which is about, there was feedback from highways about the size of the driveways being too small. And I was just wondering what the ramifications of that are. Does that mean, because usually when we look at planning applications for much smaller developments than this, we spend quite a lot of time talking about driveways, whereas it looks like there might be a lot of driveways here that are too small and we haven't covered that yet. Does it matter? Does it mean that it won't be possible to get cycles passed to cycle storage if there's a car in the driveway? Does it mean it won't be possible to get bins passed for collection if there's cars in the driveway? Or, you know, why was that feedback given from highways about the size of driveways? Why does it matter?
It goes back to cars increasing in size in recent years. So normally we would expect a driveway to be of a length where you don't have a vehicle overhanging the footway or the highway. So that's why we ask for either the driveways to be lengthened or widened to make sure you've got space. If you've got rear cycle storage, you've got room to get your cycle past the parked vehicle. I think the number of driveways that were too small have significantly reduced over the iterations of the site. So it was a query that we went back to the applicant at an early stage. I believe they're okay now, but I will need to double check.
Yeah, I would like to know if we were minded to approve this, would that mean there potentially being obstructions to the pavement then of overhanging of vehicles from
I mean,
driveways?
typically now that the size of vehicle that we look to assess is something that's come out of our Institution of Structural Engineer guidance on car park design. They have a design vehicle which represents about 95% of the vehicle fleet now. So that has a length of 4.9 meters and a width of 2 meters, excluding mirrors. So, you know, as long as the driveway is enough to get that vehicle off the highway, is at least 5 meters long, but we usually stipulate a minimum of 5.5 meters or 6 meters if there's an opening door in front of the vehicle, because that just gives people room to move around the vehicle itself.
Apologies, it's still you've stumped stumped me with your question. So did you have another part to?
I mean, I've got 2 more questions, which I hope are really quick ones.
Yeah, go for it.
One of them is about the local housing need assessment recommendation of how many dwellings should be wheelchair accessible, and that figure not being met. I was just wondering how much weight that policy has. Is it a recommendation that has no weight, or is it a policy that isn't being complied with? The recommendation is 9%. this development is 7.4%, presumably less if none of the 9 self-build plots are wheelchair accessible. Presumably that figure will be even lower.
Yeah, there's government guidance in the National Planning Policy Guidance, which says that we shouldn't seek to require that type of requirements through the planning process. And the housing needs assessment also acknowledges that you can't require that provision in market housing. So on that basis, I think the provision that we have secured and what we heard the applicant saying in terms of the potential for other sites is that's a reasonable result, I'd say.
Okay, and you had another question, I think. Oh, sorry, I didn't see it.
Well,
Supplementary.
it's also
Apologies.
related to the highways. What we've heard about adopted and unadopted in the context of this application leaves me with a number of questions. The householders being responsible for that part that's within their curtilage, which actually affects the access to their neighbours' properties, seems to be problematic. Is that causing any concern for you?
The council's highway design guide, which is applicable at the time that this application was made and has subsequently been suspended because of its age, stipulates the different types of access to properties that are required depending on the number of properties that are served by the access. So you can allow a shared private drive for up to 5 dwellings. So the applicant is perfectly within their rights of the highway design guide as it stood at the time to have a number of shared private drives. Ideally, we would see more of the highway adopted because it then is there's a single entity responsible for its maintenance, which would be the local authority, the local highway authority. But there is still the scope for the applicant to have private areas because they can be less expansive than the requirements would be for an adopted highway.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to just ask anything further on that?
A different question.
Different question. Okay.
Again,
Go on.
hopefully a really quick one.
Yeah.
Just a bit of clarification. Condition 13 says that any trees or plants within the lifetime of development die, they need to be replaced next planting season. And then the next condition, condition 14, says that any trees or plants within the period of 5 years die, they need to be replaced. Is that for different landscaping plans, depending on if it's public area or private, or is it mistake, or why the difference between 5 years or lifetime of the development?
Yeah, I believe condition 14 should say any trees within a lifetime to match condition 13. So that's an error, sorry.
Right, I think. Okay, one more. Okay. If members, while we're just waiting for the answers for this question, want to be thinking ahead to the debate that we're about to move into and the very perhaps succinct points that they may or may not wish to make, and I would like us to push on into that as soon as we're able to, but I do just want to wait until we've had this the answer to this question.
So in terms of the self-build question, the marketing strategy, which is dated June 2024, part 9.7, it says the construction of each self and custom build dwelling shall be completed within 24 months of the purchase of the site. I have looked, and this is kind of standard across most councils, this kind of time frame, and I believe it is to help secure, we actually help secure and finalise and finish that self-build plot, and so it's completed. and that we can monitor when it's completed by. So for example, we want to make sure that once they've completed it, they don't sell it straight away to someone else that's not a self-builder. So we want to make sure it meets that self-build definition and it's finished and it's kept as self-build.
So that's considered a reasonable and necessary condition, even though we're not conditioning the rest of the development to be completed by a certain time.
Yeah, we've not separately conditioned it. It's just part of the marketing strategy and the phases of the self-build plots, how it's proposed.
Thank you.
Everyone else comes from the fact that it's a different typology of housing provision, which has a different act or part of the act covering it. So that's where we've taken those references from. Can I just say something about the self-build and the questions we had about if they were taken, if this plot was bought by someone from the Gypsy and Traveller community, people fall under that definition. There is a condition 36, condition 36, which requires that they are developed as single plots. So they couldn't be combined under the terms of this planning permission. Can't remember who asked the question. There we go.
Okay, I think that we need to move into debate and get to considering the recommendations. It's obviously quite a complicated application with perhaps more detail than was initially anticipated. So I invite members, I'm not, as I say, not looking at this exact moment for proposals on the recommendation, but I would like any indication of where people are and any things that they're wanting to take into consideration. If I can see anybody who's wanting to make points, Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've had a helpful discussion and certainly I'm assured why the recommendation is as it is in terms of the provision of Gypsy and Traveller pitches on site. I think it's a situation that will change going forward, but I think the recommendation is certainly defensible. Some aspects of the scheme I'm less happy with. I think it's a mistake not to have residents parking prior to the problems that I think most of us know will arise, but it is what it is, and that is in itself is not grounds to refuse the application. Condition around planning permission being required for change of use to HMOs is good. I think my assumption is that this site will be classed as a new entity in terms of not forming part of neighbouring areas that already have reached or are about to reach the thresholds for HMOs. So I think who knows what will happen. There may be applications coming forward, and it may be that we're not in a position to robustly refuse those applications. But again, not a reason to object to this application. So I'm when it comes to it, we're more than happy to support.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing further hands at the minute. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, we're kind of echoing a lot of that, I guess. There's a difference between acceptable against policy versus what you think is necessarily good. I think it isn't good on the environmental impact per house. I think it isn't good on the affordability. I think it isn't good on accessibility and the amount of disabled parking. We're talking as a city about need for car journeys, and we should have more as a percentage of our car parking dedicated to those who actually need to drive. So we should have higher, well, way higher than 9%, and we've got less than the threshold. I think that we've got a lot of private parking here when it's a very well connected by both public transport and by cycling, and not enough non-private parking, considering that it's going to be covered day one in people who are using nearby areas, and there are no amenities, so people are going to be driving to use the amenities elsewhere. But none of those for me are things that are not in line with policy, and I'm minded to lean into the approval, because I can't see anything on there. Same for Gypsy and Traveller sites. It meets the policies, even though I think we should be aspiring to something a lot more, a lot better than this, and it's a relatively muted and dull application in front of us today, personally.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm not seeing other hands, so I'll just give you my quick two penn'orths worth and then move us to look for a proposal. I think that I share some of the comments that have or concerns that have been raised around the adopted highways, and particularly around the longer term amenity of residents in terms of their accessibility. We have areas in the city with private roads that are in really very poor states, and it's a problem that you know, it's a pity to see that potentially being built in at this stage. So I would hope that we will be looking to think about the ways in which we can address that, if not on this application, on future applications. And, you know, likewise, in terms of the issues around the accessible housing, they're only as accessible as they are in terms of people actually being able to get there. And we need to make sure that we're not just delivering the very minimum in terms of policy thresholds. The big one for me, obviously, is the application of policy H5 and the Gypsy and Traveller pictures or commuted sum. And I think officers have been clear that this doesn't meet the updated policy H5. But I think they have also given us a very clear steer on what would or wouldn't be reasonable in terms of either what would be defensible at an appeal, or what we can push for in terms of what the applicant is delivering. It's a very, very, very uncomfortable position that I find myself in. And I certainly don't want to see anything like this happening in terms of future applications that come in within the time frame that we can afford as much weight as possible to policy H5. And obviously, as soon as the local plan is adopted, I would expect that we would be having pictures delivered on site on all strategic sites coming forward. That has to be balanced against the fact that there is at least a fairly sizable off-site contribution, but an off-site contribution, as with an affordable off-site contribution, is only any good if it actually delivers something that is then tangible. And I'm not clear that that is there. However, we are where we are. So from that point of view, it will be with reluctance that I will have to support this application. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I think just all I would say is on the application, I think there is not enough in this to refuse it. I think, you know, people have said certain things are less than perfect. For me, a lot of the frustrations I have are things that are not to do with the application before us, but the processes we have. So, for example, I do feel quite strongly that these communities where people pay a rent, you know, management charge are very undesirable, and we keep having them come through. And I think that's something that could benefit from the council having a broader look at it. You know, I'm assuming there's nothing in it in the sort of local plan, but I think that would be a good thing to, you know, potentially look at. There was one other point I was going to make, which I've. Oh, sorry, also about some of Section 106s, how the Section 106, you know, I think maybe there's an issue as a council for how we, as a planning committee, could potentially fully sign these off. I don't think it would, you know, take a massive amount of our time if we looked at planning applications and we looked at Section 106, but I have no idea how revolutionary that would be across the sort of country. So that's just, you know, sort of what I think. And then just the final sort of point I'll make is, I know, as you always say, rightly, Chair, that, you know, it's a meeting of the council held in public rather than public meeting. But I do often feel there are times when there's a member of the public may have a bit of information that it may be worth us adjourning a meeting for on occasion, and potentially having some times where we go to the developer for a quick comeback on certain things. Not being discussed today, but obviously Swift boxes being an old favourite. And for example, on the number of houses that are disabled access compliant, we're talking about one fraction here and one fraction of another. Yeah, I don't think it'd be a bad thing to look at, put to 100 developer in the eye and say, well, can you not get it up, that bit higher and just see what they say on some of the things. But, on balance, I think there's, with everything we've got, there's plenty there to be able to approve it.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I'm just going to remind you of the external planning consultant who advised us very strongly against taking such an approach in terms of speaking to either members of the public or applicants once we're into the hearing. And I don't want to get too far into any discussion on that at this moment in time. It is something that's been considered, and I'm acting on the advice of numerous officers and external consultants as well, that we have a very clearly defined, this is the point at which we can take contribution, and this is the point at which we then move into a committee, and it's up to the committee to make determination.
I do agree with that. However, she also said lots of stuff that we are not sticking to. For example, in her view, we should, as good as not be asking any questions at planning committee meetings, we should have sorted everything out beforehand. There's lots of things she said we are definitely not doing.
Let's continue that conversation. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with most of what's been said, particularly concerned about the parking. I think there will be substantial parking on this site, and we'll have to revisit parking restrictions on it fairly soon. And please, condition 3 is in. I think it's critical that we do that, otherwise it will just become HMOs in a very short time. I am minded to support this application. I'm concerned about the traveller policy and the fact that the community sum never seems to get spent. I mean, let's get the sum spent. Let's actually get some traveller pitches provided. I've slammed volume developers in the past so many times, but I'm actually going to praise this one because they are actually pursuing a no gas, low carbon policy here, using heat pumps to provide space heating. And for once, that's a sign of something positive. I wish every other volume house builder would take that same thing.
Okay, thank you. So I think that everybody said the piece that they wish to say, so I'm looking for proposals now. Councillor Colwick.
Thank you, Chair. Well, like others, there are elements of this about which I'm not entirely happy, but nothing that I think provides grounds for refusal. Therefore, if we are looking to make a proposal to approve this application, then I'm happy to propose.
Thank you. Do I have anybody to second that? Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I think second the recommendation in full here. I think when there's a one resident living there, we can get 100% to sign a petition day one for Res Park, but we can't add that as a condition. And it might be the most, you might, if you fed our planning rules to an AI, it would tell you this is the most generic thing you can get. But seconded nonetheless.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Melly, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to propose an amendment, either to propose it as something else or to ask people who have proposed it and seconded to, if they'd like to agree these changes. I'd like to propose amending condition 19 to be clear that the approved details have to include details of the location of crossings and details of tactile paving to include, colour coding and colour contrast. And also, seeing as the purpose of condition 3 is to do with protecting family housing to be used as housing, I think that means it would also be reasonable to add a condition about short-term holiday lets. I appreciate that in this particular location, HMOs are more of an issue than short-term holiday lets, but I still think it's an important, would be an important condition to add to ensure that the houses are truly used as homes. So that would either mean amending condition 3 or adding an extra condition.
So if I can just take each of those in turn. So Councillor Colwick, in terms of...
I was just going to say, having proposed it, that in principle, I wouldn't be opposed to including either of those if it were legally possible to do so, but I'm not entirely sure that it is.
That was going to be my second part. So you're not objecting in principle to either of those, and Councillor Rose the same. So I'm not sure whether Gareth or Rahina just needs to advise. My sense is that it's possibly the short-term holiday let one that is the slightly more tricky of the two.
I've tended to advise committee that because of, and this has changed over the years as the planning history on other sites and from other authorities and appeal decisions comes forth, gives it more clarity that short-term letting accommodation, commercial short-term letting accommodation is not considered generally to be within C3. So you wouldn't normally have a condition requiring planning permission which doesn't fall within the planning permission you're granting. Which I guess for those people out in the community who might want to buy a property and use it for C3, use it for short-term letting, doesn't make, and they flick through the planning permission, they don't see anything that says it can't be short-term letting. So maybe the way to approach it is with an informative that says our general approach is that a short-term letting accommodation wouldn't fall within the planning permission granted rather than a condition. If you've got anything to add to that, Arena.
Thank you, Gareth. Yes, I would agree that we should avoid including a condition specifically dealing with a short-term let. Again, we need to look at what the permission is for a C3. An informative wouldn't do any harm if that's what members were minded to include.
Councillor Stewart, did you have a comment?
Thanks. I can't think of many areas that'd be less likely to be a holiday let than this particular application across York. And if that is the case, then we'd logically be putting these conditions on virtually every single development we look at, and that for me would take away credibility. So I wouldn't favour a condition which I don't think would be enforceable or informative, because I don't see it as a threat. I think we're far better having that sort of thing where it would be an issue in an area.
My take would be that if we're okay to amend the wording on condition 19 just to reflect the access issues both on the adopted and non-adopted highways, I think that is useful and helpful. I take your point, Councillor Stewart, but equally I think an informative doesn't necessarily harm things, but I think the clear steer is that a condition wouldn't be appropriate. So my view. Oh yeah, these are further amendments as well. Yeah. So yeah, my view would be an informative rather than seeking to condition. Councillor Melly, are you happy having proposed that?
I mean, not happy, but if that's the legal advice we've been given and that's the extent of our powers, then happy. Yeah. Go with it.
Okay. And I'm just reminded as well that we did discuss an amendment to condition 13 and 14, just to make sure that they're aligned with each other and that's for the lifetime of the development. So with all of those amendments, it's been proposed and seconded to approve. So Gareth, do you just want to summarise before we go to the vote?
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation is that delegated authority be given to the head of Planning and Development Services to approve the application. That's subject to the Section 106 agreement, as varied by the written update and the planning conditions, with the variation to condition 14, the variation to condition 19, and an additional informative regarding, an additional informative regarding short-term letting accommodation and the use of C3 accommodation for that reason.
Okay, so if I can see by show of hands, all those in favour of that proposal? And anybody against? Any abstention? So that is passed unanimously and approval is thereby granted. So that brings us to the end of this meeting, but we have another meeting which is due to have started 7 minutes ago. So first of all, I will just quickly apologise to anybody who is here for the 4:30 meeting for the delay. My proposal is that we take a 15-minute break and we are back here at 5 to 5 on the dot to begin the 4:30 meeting.